So the past 2 years, we have been hearing all sorts of strange arguments being developed to justify what Israel is doing in Gaza. And these have really been smoke screens that have been put up so that you really can't argue with someone. They try to shut it down before there's any argument, because there is no logic or any rational argument which can really be used to defend what Israel is doing. They've crossed all bounds in that regard. So I just wanted to take a moment to look at one by one, a few of the tropes or a few of the statements that they put forth. So the first, as we've always heard, especially from Piers Morgan for the longest time, but less so more recently, is, do you condemn Hamas? And I think now we've come to a point where that isn't our starting point. The discussion does not start from that. Given everything that's happened, given the thousands upon thousands of people, the tens of thousands of people that have been murdered by Israel, I think the argument should start from, do you condemn Israel? Do you condemn its war crimes? Do you condemn its genocide? Do you condemn the policies that have been put in place by Netanyahu, who has honestly just taken the entire region and put it to fire? So I think really the argument should be, do you condemn Israel? The next argument that is put forth is Hamas uses human shields, and that's why we have to. Now, I think Bill Burr put a really good point on this: is that if there's a baby in front of you and you're fighting a man, you're not gonna punch through the baby, right? You are gonna move around him, and there are numerous ways where if you're so inclined, you can avoid civilian casualties. And Israel keeps on saying it's the most moral army in the world, and it gives, warnings and removes civilians and this and that. That really isn't true when it comes to the actual on-ground situation, because otherwise you would not have this level of civilian deaths in a place which, if you look at it from Islamabad's, like compared to Islamabad, if you take Bani Gala to the new airport, that is the length of Gaza. And then if you take it from the hills, the Margala Hills, to, I think it's Liaquat Bagh or the big Bagh in Pindi, that is the width of it. So it's really a tiny place. And imagine having 2 million people within that space. Then it's not really human shields. Then anything you target, you're going to be targeting civilians, because that's where they are. They're in this tiny space, right? So that I really think is one argument. The second is that we have documented proof of Israel using human shields. Palestinians on cars. We have videos of this. We have pictures of this, right? We have statements from Israeli soldiers who have come out and, they've broken the silence and they've spoken on these issues. So when we talk about Hamas using human shields, we aren't 100% clear on whether they do or not. Maybe they do, and certainly if that is, that's a war crime and condemnable. However, what we do know for sure is that Israel does this. And Israel is a state entity. Hamas is a non-state actor as such. Right? And this is what Israel itself argues. So a state entity has a far greater obligation to be abiding by the Geneva Conventions and abiding by international law. The next is blood libel, and that every argument, whenever we say that the Israelis have killed this many children, you hear the Israeli ambassador to the UK or the Israeli spokesperson say that this is a blood libel. Again, this is an argument to shut down any criticism that comes out against Israel. And it's something that isn't flying anymore. People have really gotten fed up. And I think one barometer of this is, the same was put to Piers Morgan. And he says that, essentially what you're doing is you're not allowing us to have any form of debate or any discussion. Without critique, you can't fix your policies. If everything is hunky-dory, right, the entire world community would not be criticizing them, especially their own allies. So this blood libel thing, they're using historic injustices against the Jewish people, and they're defending their evil actions of today by that. And I think that is a great disservice to Jews in general. Also seen the Israelis do is they took the actions of October 7th and they have really tried to portray these as so barbaric and so beyond the pale of anything that civilized human beings could even imagine. Right, the beheading of babies, ripping children out of pregnant women's stomachs, burning people alive, raping women, whereas the evidence for this has been, extremely thin. And really, what we've seen is that they've used this argument to fuel, defend, and allow for the bloodlust, really, that has been that is being perpetrated in Gaza. And so it's no more a discussion of blood libel or actions that are taking place or Israel getting justice for the victims of October 7th. It is about punitive, damaging, harmful actions against the Palestinian people collectively, right? A bloodlust that, there needs to be a bloodletting that the Israelis feel. And once that number is hit, we don't know what that number is. Once they are satisfied, that is when it's going to end. It isn't about the hostages anymore. It's about ensuring that the Palestinian people suffer in general, not just Hamas. The Palestinian people suffer and never decide to try to do anything to resist again. The IDF is the most moral army in the world. This is an argument that has been put forth. It started by, I think, a former British army chief or army general who visited. He said this a while back. And, when you have to repeatedly call yourself the most moral army in the world, there must be something fishy that's going on. Israel clearly is not the most moral army in the world. If anything, it has repeatedly violated the laws of war. Now, one of the arguments it gives to claim that it is, the most moral army in the world is that it gives warnings to civilians and that it uses the laws of war and applies them and has, lawyers within the armed forces who take decisions on targeting, who to hit, when to hit, and what weaponry to use in that regard. The issue is that when we look, in detail on the types of tactics the Israelis use on the ground, they are a violation. Well, they interpret the laws of war, the Geneva Conventions, to such an extent that they almost break them. There's no point. So let me give you an example. When you have to take an attack, say it's a building and it has a mid-level commander, a terrorist commander or Hamas leader in there. Right? You have to assess that the military advantage gained from killing this commander has to outweigh any potential civilian losses that could occur. Now, this could be civilian deaths, civilian injuries, or loss to civilian property. And it's only if this particular military advantage outweighs the civilian losses can you actually, is it authorized to do this attack. What we see Israel doing is that it gives so much weightage to even low-level Hamas commanders, and it gives such little weightage to Palestinian lives that it skews this entire equation. So the calculus that Israelis do is extremely biased in their favor and against any standards that have been set. Let me give you an example. Israel was willing to kill in the Jabalia, this was earlier on in the first few months of the attack, the Jabalia refugee camp. They dropped a JDAM, a massive bomb, killed about 100 civilians for one particular Hamas commander. That's really what the argument was. He wasn't a very senior commander, but they were willing. So it was 1 to 100. That was the ratio. The US at its height in Afghanistan, when it was fighting the Taliban, had a ratio of 1 to 15, which was permissible in their lives. We've also seen incidents where when they were trying to rescue, I think, 3 hostages, they killed up to 300 people plus. So that again becomes something that is just no other army in the world would do such a thing. So this argument that it is the most moral army in the world is an absolute farce. Another issue that we want to raise is, the conflating of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism or anti-Israeli critique. That becomes something that is just, untenable. Because if we cannot criticize Israel as a political entity, as an entity that takes actions that impact, that have humanitarian consequences, that have consequences on, the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians, then there's really no point in even discussing this issue, right? You cannot simply make that conflation. You can't bring them together and simply say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. And this is not only just gone to Israel. When it goes to Israel, it also means the IDF. So any action taken by the IDF, that would also be considered anti-Semitism. When you criticize their killing of civilians, that also becomes anti-Semitism. The only time it wasn't was this recent attack on the church in Gaza, right? And immediately you saw condemnation from around the world, but also the Israeli government accepting that this was a mistake, it'll never happen again. There was humanitarian aid that was allowed in, the patriarchs and the religious leadership, Christian leadership was allowed to enter and visit this area. So suddenly, when it became something that was, hurt the Western sentiment and the Christian sentiment, there are dozens of mosques that have been completely obliterated. And there's not been an ounce of criticism. I think more than we criticize the Israelis, we should be criticizing the Muslim leaders across the world for this. They haven't made it an issue, and they certainly have leverage over the Israelis, and they should be utilizing that in a better way. The next point that we have is, can we trust the numbers that Hamas puts out? This is something that the Israelis have said, that you cannot trust Hamas. It's a terrorist organization. And if we reverse this, can you trust anything that the Israelis say? I mean, time and time and time again, they have been proven false. The numbers that they quote, the statements that they give. Right now they're saying no one's dying of famine, that aid is being given and nobody's being killed there. We're seeing dead bodies. We're seeing people in record numbers being admitted to hospitals for malnutrition. That doesn't just happen out of the blue. You have a stated state policy which does not allow aid to go in. And so discussing whether we can discuss whether we can even accept Hamas numbers or Israeli numbers is problematic. The other thing you have to look at is the UN and a number of other entities around the world have said that the Gaza Ministry of Health, the numbers that they've issued in terms of civilian losses, deaths that have taken place, have always been accurate historically, not just since October 7th. They have always been roughly accurate, right? Within margin of error, completely. There haven't been exaggerations. There haven't been attempts at using deaths as a propaganda tool. Unlike what the Israelis have done, right? They've conflated numbers and they've created a number of problems within your ability to be able to count the losses there. If you even look at how they assess Hamas numbers, they've said that 30,000 Hamas soldiers were killed because they realize that the amount of people that they've killed is exceptionally high. And so what they've done is that they've taken out the children, and then everyone else is basically Hamas that they've killed. That becomes somewhat highly problematic, right? And it's something you can't trust when it comes from the Israelis. During the recent conflict between Iran and Israel, the Iranians, they don't have the best guided missiles, and one of their missiles hit a target near a hospital, and it blew out some of the windows and damaged the hospital. And Israelis started going on TV and saying that targeting hospitals is a war crime, it is against the Geneva Conventions, it is against international law in general, and nobody took them seriously, because for the past 2 years, all they've been doing is bombing hospitals. And at least initially they had some sense, and they tried to justify it that, no, first they said that this was the Palestinians and their rockets that misfired and hit hospitals. And then they finally agreed that, yes, this was our missiles, but, Hamas was using the hospital as a human shield or as a shield, and it was hiding there, or that they had bases, Hamas command centers underneath hospitals. None of those turned out to be true. And so what we're seeing right now is Israel really being the boy that cried wolf, and nobody's really taking it seriously when it was under attack from the Iranians. They're saying, you reap what you sow. Another argument they're putting forth is that it's not genocide. I think everybody's come around to this. I mean, maybe in the early parts of this conflict in Palestine, people could argue that you didn't have that intent, even though the actions were certainly there. You didn't have the intent to obliterate the Palestinian people. I think that has really changed, especially the policy of starvation that is calculated to bring about the destruction of the Palestinian people in whole or in part. And that's what we're seeing being played out in the destruction and the rubble that is Ramallah or the various settlements across Gaza. So there is no argument left. I mean, even the most ardent international law narrow view holding people now understand that this is clearly genocide, and I think the Israelis are in a lot of trouble once the dust settles, there has to be some statement that is given on this. There has to be some level of accountability, because you can't have a genocide in this day and age, even though it's being perpetrated. So I think there's going to be some accountability, and I think Israel is going to be in a very difficult position after this, because they cannot justify what they've done, and now it's done. Right, the actions and the intent, the mens rea and the actus rea of genocide certainly seems to be have really been played out. Another argument that Netanyahu put forward is that if the Palestinians released hostages or put down their arms, there would be no violence. But if the Israelis did this, they would be destroyed, right? Because they're in such a hostile region. That's why they have to have a very robust military response to any threat that comes to them. The issue is that the Palestinians, for all intents and purposes, have none of the level of weaponry, are nothing compared to Israel in terms of military might, right? So they already are, if one could say, disarmed. And so the disarming of say Palestinian groups, what are we talking about? Like even small arms, because that's what they're using, or the limited number of explosives that they have, the homemade rockets that they make, which Israel has a 90+% success rate in shooting those down. They're barely a pinprick to the Israelis. So when we're talking about the impact of whatever weapons the Palestinians have, it's negligible. The issue really is Israel wants for Palestine to stop resisting, for stopping. It wants the Palestinian people to stop saying that there's an occupation. It wants them to hand over its land to the Israelis and allow for settlements to be built all around it. They've already done that in the West Bank. West Bank has become these small Bantustans, these small, enclaves in which Palestinians live in terrible conditions, as opposed to settlements which are, first world settlements, very well designed. And you have pogroms against Palestinians taking place, right? You'll have settlers just decide one day, today we're going to destroy this particular Palestinian. So that is the West Bank. In Gaza, what they did was they put it under a severe siege. So much so that the Israelis at one point had to calculate, based on the population, how many calories of food should they allow inside Palestine, inside Gaza. And that was, it just seems, this cruelty at an industrial scale, where because they hold every entry point, they're in cahoots with the Egyptians, and so the Rafah crossing as well is under their control. So really, nothing really goes in and out of Gaza, and this is before October 7th. Nothing would go in and out of Gaza without the Israelis knowing. There were attempts at smuggling things, and some of that included food and humanitarian things, but also weapons. But beyond that, there hasn't been much success in that. So we have to keep in mind that the real argument here is that Israel has an overwhelming military might in the region, which the Palestinians cannot reflect in any way. So the Palestinians already are disarmed, and this is the state that they're in. Because of not having the weaponry, they are being, essentially a genocide is taking place against them. So if anything, the international community should be arming Palestinians to be able to have a defense under international law, which permits them to do this. There are UN General Assembly resolutions which specifically state that the Palestinian people have the right to armed struggle. And so I think that is something that we really need to properly understand, and not simply agree to or accept Israeli propaganda arguments there.
The revolution will be live.